Hello everyone and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Today in this session we are going to have a discussion on the newspaper of 15th March 2024. Now before we begin, a quick announcement for all of you. There is a workshop that we are going to conduct, and this workshop will be conducted live on our Byjus Exam Prep app, and this will be conducted on 16th March at 6 p.m. So anyone who is interested and every one of you who's interested can go and download the app and you can attend the live session there. So let's begin with our session with today's newspaper. Now when we look at the topics that we have for today's newspaper, there are three topics that we are going to cover in detail, and these three topics are Bhutan's opening move, its Gelephu gambit, and Modi will travel to Bhutan next week. Now these two we are going to cover simultaneously, alright? And then apart from that, the third article that we are going to cover is what are the causes of the flare-up in Eastern Congo. And we'll discuss about the conflict and the history of conflict and the international implications that this conflict can have. So there are these topics to be covered in detail, and then there are other topics that we'll cover in short. One, the recommendations that has been put forward by our ex-president Ramnath Kovind about simultaneous polls, and then wholesale food inflation that has sped up in Feb, and why government are seeing red on Rhodamine B. So what is Rhodamine B? We'll try to understand, and what are the problems? We'll see that. So these are the topics that we are going to cover in today's newspaper. Now first, the articles which are related to India-Bhutan relations. So there is one article on the editorial page that we have right here, Bhutan's opening move, its Gelephu gambit, and then the second article, Modi will travel to Bhutan next week. So what is the context that we are talking about? The context basically here is the fact that our Prime Minister Narendra Modi is scheduled to visit Bhutan, which is supposed to happen next week. And this is where we see that this is signaling at better cooperation and better relations between India and Bhutan, which have been historic partners. Historically, we have shared very good relations with Bhutan, and this is, you can say in a manner, a continuation of the same. Now, the history of India-Bhutan relations has been characterized by very deep-rooted ties and friendship, and also in cultural affinity and strategic cooperation that we have always maintained. And these relations have evolved over the years. We have seen that there have been various significant milestones that we have had in this particular relation between India and Bhutan. So for example, when you look at some of the early ties, you'll see that our relations go way back to 1865. And then 1865, there was this treaty that is called as Treaty of Sinchula. Now this Treaty of Sinchula is where you can say that in a manner a formal relationship began between India and Bhutan. So the formal relationships in a manner in the 19th century it began when Bhutan had signed this Treaty of Sinchula with British India back then in 1865. And following this we see that there was, this happened just after a war that happened between Bhutan and British India, and this was if you remember this or if you know about this, this was the Duar War. So following the Duar War, we see that this treaty was signed between India, or that is British India back then, and Bhutan. Now under the treaty, we saw that Bhutan had ceded some territories to British India in exchange for an annual subsidy that will be paid by the British, and this in a manner was, you can say, a beginning of formal relations between British India back then and Bhutan. Now after India's independence in 1947, we see that a newly established Indian government and Bhutan, they signed a treaty which was called as the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, and this was in 1949. And this treaty basically replaced the subsidy that was being paid until now as a part of the Treaty of Sinchula, and there was a larger annual grant that was established between India and Bhutan, and also this is something that also made way for free trade and extradition protocols between India and Bhutan. And crucially, it also stipulated that Bhutan would be guided by India in its foreign affairs and also in defense, although Bhutan maintained an autonomy over its internal affairs, but for external affairs and in defense, we saw that India would help Bhutan, and India now has very significant ties with Bhutan. And then we see that between 1950s to 1960s until the end of 1960s, we see that we have much better ties with Bhutan. After the Treaty of 1949, we see that India's relations with Bhutan deepens, and India starts playing a very key role in modernization of Bhutan as well. And India also helped Bhutan in building a lot of road networks, a lot of telecommunication, also established health and educational facilities in Bhutan during this time. So this is where you can say that a lot of road, a lot of infrastructure, health, education, telecommunication, in all these things we see that now India starts helping Bhutan, and India starts helping Bhutan in establishing a lot of things that were required. So this is where we see that the ties between India and Bhutan starts to deepen a bit. And this is where we see that in 1970s, Bhutan's UN membership was also supported by India. In 1971 specifically, with India's support, Bhutan became a member of United Nations. And this period also saw Bhutan gradually taking more control over its foreign affairs, although the provisions of 1949 treaty still remained in its place. So that's why this was very, very significant, that in 1970s, where we see that especially in 1971, we see that India supports Bhutan's inclusion into the UN. And now we see that Bhutan becomes a member of the UN following this. So after this, we see that now Bhutan starts taking more control over its foreign affairs as well. And this is where we see that there was a revision in treaty that happened in 2007. In 2007, recognizing Bhutan's growing sovereignty and maturity as a nation, India and Bhutan now signed a revised treaty of friendship in 2007. And this new treaty replaced the treaty that we had in 1949, and that's why this is where we see that it gives Bhutan a greater control over its foreign and defense policies while still ensuring very close coordination with India. So overall you can say that this is where better control over its foreign and defense affairs. So this basically was, you can say, a revision. This was a revision of 1949 treaty. So this is where we see that now we start believing in Bhutan's own abilities as well, that they will be able to do better with their own foreign and defense policies, and that's why we see that they coordinate very closely with India, yet they establish their own, they start taking more control over their affairs. So over a period of time, that's why we have seen that there have been various aspects of India's cooperation with Bhutan. So for example, economic and developmental cooperation, that we have seen that India has played a very principal partner in Bhutan's development. The cooperation has been spanning over various different sectors, whether it is hydropower, which is very, very significant part of Bhutan's economy, and at the same time India has been investing in and also buys electricity from Bhutan's hydropower projects that also benefits both the countries economically in a manner. So that's why this is one very, very important aspect of India and Bhutan cooperation, where we talk about hydroelectricity. So one very important part has been hydroelectricity. And then after that we see that there are cultural ties as well, that India and Bhutan relation has been very cemented by the strong cultural ties that we have between the people of those areas. And there is an unrestricted movement of people across the border for trade, for tourism, and also for family ties, that also has tried to nurture a really deep sense of friendship between the two nations. And then even security and strategic cooperation has been one very, very important aspect, because we know that for India, Bhutan also serves as a buffer state between India and China. And that's why India and Bhutan, they have very closely coordinated on all the security and defense matters as well. So that's why for India, you can say that in a manner, Bhutan for India becomes a buffer state. Bhutan becomes a buffer state for India, and this is very, very crucial here, and that's why we see that we have very close defense and security ties with Bhutan. And that's why we have seen that India has also played a very significant role in assisting Bhutan with military training and infrastructure development in its defense as well. So that's why here the China factor is one factor that always comes in the context of India and Bhutan, where the relationships between India and Bhutan also have been influenced by the strategic dynamics that are involving China, where we see that Bhutan shares a very contested border with China, and there have been, you know about the Doklam standoff that happened in 2017, that also talks about, or you can say, it also highlights the strategic importance of Bhutan in the context of India-China border tensions. So that's why India has supported Bhutan's territorial integrity and also the sovereignty of this nation, and at the same time we have tried to work very closely to address all the common security concerns that India and Bhutan have, especially in the context of China. So China factor, this basically comes with regard to the border tensions. Right, with regard to the border tensions, we see that China factor always comes into the place. Now, apart from that, if we look at the future prospects and the current dynamics that India and Bhutan share, we see that we continue to share a unique, a very special partnership where there is mutual respect and there is shared interest and a very deep-rooted friendship that we have with this country. And that's why as Bhutan also navigates its path towards greater economic development and global engagement, its relation with India also has been very, very important and has been, you can say in a manner, a cornerstone of India, its own foreign policy, that is Bhutan's foreign policy. So that's why we see that there are all these things with regards to the dynamics, and overall it becomes very crucial between India and Bhutan to maintain this friendship, peace and cooperation, and it is mutually beneficial for both the countries when we look at the geopolitics of this particular area. And that's why in that context the threat from China is very, very crucial to understand, that there are a lot of problems. There are territorial disputes, for example, where we see that China has been claiming the territories which are on Bhutan's western side, especially the Doklam region, and also in the north. These are areas which are also significant to India, and that's why this Doklam standoff that happened in 2017, it is a very significant you can say event in this entire context of the border threats that China poses for both Bhutan and for India. And where we see that in Doklam, what happened, that India intervened on Bhutan's behalf, and that led to a very tense standoff on the Doklam area, because that area is not only significant for Bhutan, but at the same time it's very significant for India as well, because this is an area that also connects India's mainland to India's northeastern states, and that's why it becomes very crucial to maintain stability in that particular area. So that's why we see that there have been a lot of issues, and this is where we see that there is a growing influence of China that also poses a very important challenge for India and Bhutan relations, where we see that China has been trying to establish stronger ties with countries in the South Asia, and that also includes Bhutan, whether it's initiatives like Belt and Road initiatives, or creating strategic importance for some of the areas where economically they have been trying to present opportunities to Bhutan, so that they might take some of that, and in a manner you can say an economic bait that a lot of countries in other parts of Asia and other parts of even parts of Africa have been taking with China, where they become completely dependent on China, and later it becomes impossible for them to come out of the cusp of China. And this is what we have seen with Sri Lanka, this is what's happening with Pakistan, and this is where a lot of African nations also slowly are moving towards that. So now the countries understand that, and it's a very, very important part of their strategic importance and how they understand the influence and pressure that many a times China builds towards them. And that's why from the perspective of border negotiations also, we see that Bhutan and China, they have had multiple rounds of border talks to resolve all the issues that are there. And India always has been watching very closely when it comes to the concerns and the negotiations with regards to all these things. And at the same time, in the context of Indian border or India-China border rivalry also, this is something that is very, very crucial for us to understand. So that's why there are all these things that become very crucial for us to understand, and all the aspects of not only India-Bhutan relations, but also in the context of how it is important from the context of India-China relations and Bhutan-China relations, because border disputes will always play a major role here. For China, we know that for China, the entire world becomes China, that they claim everything out there, whether their eastern borders, western borders, their water borders, sea borders, everything they would be claiming as their own. And that's why they have so many problems with all the countries that border China. And we have been facing the problem since our independence, and we now see that there are issues elsewhere as well. So that's why maintaining relations with countries like Bhutan, where we have significant historical good relationships, becomes very crucial. Now, coming to the next article, and this is on page number 16. What are the causes of flare-up in Eastern Congo? Now, when we look at this article, just understand the context and what this article has been talking about, that there has been a renewed clashes in the Eastern Congo. And this is where we see that intensified fighting between the Congolese army and the Rwanda-backed M23 group. M23 group. I will discuss about M23 group later. We see that in these kind of areas, the problems have been worsening. And this is where it had led to a worsening humanitarian crisis as well. A lot of deaths and a lot of displacements with a lot of food security risks, all this happening in this particular area. So especially we are talking about these areas where we see that there have been constant problems that they have been facing. Similarly, we see that when it comes to the international response to these areas, we see that the US has urged both DRC, that is Democratic Republic of Congo, and Rwanda to avoid war, and specifically have called for Rwanda to withdraw the personnel and the missile systems that they have deployed. At the same time, the United Nations and the several Western countries also have condemned the attacks, and they have urged the M23 rebels to cease the offense that they have done there in that area. Now, when we look at the context of this, what we see is that historical context wise, you'll see that it goes back to 1994. After the 1994 Rwandan genocide, this is where we see that the escalations start. And there was an aftermath of it, and this is where significant military conflicts started happening. And then there were Congo wars that happened, the first and the second Congo wars happened in this particular area. And then it is something that kept on happening from there. And then in 2012, the M23 rebel groups, they started to emerge, and they also basically emerged from a faction of the Congolese army. So we see that there are all these things that kept on happening, and these tensions, they have been there for a long time now. And when we look at the recent violences, they have heightened the tensions with DRC has been accusing Rwanda of supporting the M23 rebels, and this has been denied by Rwanda, of course, but the conflicts remain. So let's try to understand where we are right now. So that's why this is basically what we see, that there has been an intensified fighting between the Congolese army and the Rwandan-backed M23 group around the two areas, and then it has been worsening the humanitarian crisis with deaths, displacements, and food security. Now, when it comes to where it all started from, so this is where you can say that 1994 where Rwandan genocide happened, this was very crucial aspect of this entire conflict that started back then. Now overall what we see is that the Rwandan genocide that happened in 1994 was a catastrophe, where we see that almost 8,000 people, which 8,000 Tutsis in that area, and the Hutus that were living in that area, they were massacred by the Hutu forces. And this is where it was just within a span of like 3 months, or you can say just 100 days, this entire genocide happened. And this was, you can say, so basically this, just understand where it happened and where it began from. So what we see is that here two groups we are talking about. First one, they were the Tutsis, and second, the moderate Hutus that were there. So these two were the communities which were massacred brutally, and there were more than 8 lakh deaths that happened at that point of time. 8 lakh deaths happened at that point of time, and that too, it happened only within a span of 3 months, you can say, or largely more or less 100 days of time. So just within 3 months of span, this all happened. And this was a result of an escalation in the ethnic tensions that were happening between the Hutus and the Tutsis, and these were the ethnic groups within Rwanda. Now, after this, what we see is that a lot of refugee crisis and cross-border tensions start. Following the genocide, we see that more than 2 million Rwandans, mostly these were Hutus, they fearing the retribution from the now Tutsi-dominated government, they fled to the neighboring countries, and this is where it was also the Democratic Republic of Congo, where back then it was called as Zaire. Back then it was called as Zaire, now it is called as Democratic Republic of Congo. So now this basically is where we see that a lot of people, they started moving towards Congo. Now there was a massive influx of refugees into the Democratic Republic of Congo, and this escalated existing tensions and the contribution to the regional instability that has happened in that particular area. And this led to the first Congo War. And this first Congo War happened in 1996-97. We see that the presence of the refugees and the activities of the Hutu militia who had fled to Zaire at that point of time, they contributed to the outbreak of the first Congo War. And the rebel groups which were backed by Rwanda and Uganda, they composed mainly of the Tutsis. Alright, so one end, what do we have? We have the Hutu militia. We have, on one hand, we have the Hutu militia, and on the other hand, we have the Tutsis. So we see that there are these two are basically where they are fighting. So Hutu militia is there inside Zaire, and the Tutsis basically are being backed by Rwanda and Uganda. So this is what led to the first Congo War at that point of time. And this is where we basically, you can say, in a manner, this was also this was aimed at overthrowing Zaire's long-standing dictator at that point of time. And this is where it comes to the first Congo War. Now, the alliance that we see, the alliance of the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Congo, or Zaire, this was led by one segment, and eventually we saw that they take over the control of the country. Alright, they take over the control of the country, and this is where we see that Zaire was renamed as Democratic Republic of Congo. As a part of, you can say, this is where we see that Zaire was renamed. It was renamed as Democratic Republic of Congo. So this was, you can say, as a part of the conflict, and after this conflict we see that as a result it led to the renaming of this country. And then there was the second Congo War, and this second Congo War started in 1998 and until 2003. Now this erupted after Kabila, who was leading the Zaire liberation. He was the one who ordered all the foreign troops to leave Democratic Republic of Congo, and that was basically because of a fear that he has of influence of Rwanda and Uganda increasing in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So what he did is that at that point of time he ordered that all the foreign military to leave Democratic Republic of Congo. So because he felt that the influence of Uganda and Rwanda was increasing day by day in DRC. So this is where we see that this started, and this war, which is also called as Africa's World War, we see that there were multiple African nations, and that's why it resulted in millions of deaths and actually made it one of the deadliest conflicts that we have seen in the world after World War II. And that's why we see that this was also named as Africa's World War, also called as Africa's World War, because of all this conflict that happened, and millions of deaths were seen, and there were multiple nations which were involved here. So despite there were peace agreements and efforts to stabilize the region, we see that the Democratic Republic of Congo has struggled with violence and instability, particularly in the eastern provinces. And this is where we see that the M23 rebellion starts, and it leads to the ongoing conflict that we see. Now M23 basically starts, the name it gets from is from March 23 movement, because there was a peace agreement that happened on 23rd of March 2009. All right, so there was a peace agreement. So 23rd March 2009 there was a peace agreement. 23rd March 2009 there was a peace agreement. Now this peace agreement, following this peace agreement, we see that this M23 group was, or rebel group was originated from the Congolese army. So they basically came from a faction of the Congolese army, and this group accused the DRC government of failing to implement the agreement, and that's why which included also the provisions for integration of the rebels into the military and also other aspects of society. But that did not happen, and that's why this M23, they primarily consist of the Tutsis, and they have been involved in various different conflicts that has happened since, and that's why its formation claiming also to protect the Tutsi community from the Hutu militia is what they have been saying. So largely you should know that they basically are composed of the Tutsi community. They largely composed of the Tutsi community, and they are saying that they want to protect the Tutsi community from the Hutu militia, and that's why this group has been formed. Now there was a resurgence of this group that we see in 2022, and all the recent escalations have again heightened because of this fragile security situation that has come up in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. So that's why what we see is that there has been a resurgence. There has been a resurgence of M23, in 2022, and that's why we see that this has been happening since. So now when it comes to this conflict in the eastern part of DRC, it carries very significant international implications as well, and that's why it goes beyond the immediate regions. There are a lot of things. So for example, if you look at the various aspects of it, the very first thing is about regional security. The conflict threatens the stability of the entire area of the Great Lakes of Africa, where you have Burundi, you have Rwanda, Uganda and Tanzania, and all these are the nations which are there in this particular area, and they all are threatened here, and we see that there kind of are spillover effects. There are spillover effects such as the refugee flows or cross-border insurgencies, or also the spread of the small arm that also extend the tensions and insecurities in the neighboring countries as well. So that's why we have to understand that this regional stability, it goes beyond the immediate borders, and that's why Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, all these basically are getting affected. So that's why it affects all the countries like Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanzania. And all these, basically these are also called as the Great Lakes nations. So they all are getting affected because of the spillover that you have, so in this entire Great Lakes region of Africa. Then apart from that, there obviously has been a lot of humanitarian crisis. The ongoing conflict has led to one of the world's most severe humanitarian crises that we have seen. Millions of internally displaced people and refugees, with a lot of deaths that has happened over the years. And we see that international community has been compelled to respond with humanitarian aid and also a lot of support that has gone to this region. And at the same time, it has also seen a lot of global attention that has been divided among multiple crises. So that's why we see that there has been a lot of issues here. Similarly, we see that international peacekeeping and diplomacy has also been trying to work. United Nations and various regional organizations such as the African Union, they have been heavily involved in the peacekeeping and diplomatic efforts to resolve the conflict in this region. And the effectiveness and the mandate of the international peacekeeping missions, such as we have the MONUSCO. So the MONUSCO basically stands for the United Nations mission that you have for organizational stability mission in this particular area. So so that's why you should know about MONUSCO. So now they have been they play a very important role in this particular area. So now this basically is, we see that there are subjects of very significant international debate and security as well, and that's why they all have been also looking towards this area. And it is also an area which is related to resource exploitation, that we know that DRC is very rich in minerals and they are very critical to the global industries, including cobalt or copper, diamond, gold. All these are there in this particular area. So that's why mineral wise and these precious stone wise, this has been very crucial. So this is an area which has gold, diamond, cobalt, copper. All these are the various minerals that you have in this particular area, and that's why we see that the conflict also affects the supply and all the exploitation of these resources, also involving a lot of multinational cooperation and also countries which have their strategic interests in securing them. And that's why this has implications for the global markets and also for the supply chains, especially for the electronics and renewable energy sector, which are heavily reliant on cobalt and some of the other rare minerals. And that's why this is where we see that international relations and foreign policies also come into the picture, that this conflict has also influenced the foreign policies of various different countries, and especially those who are in the West and the neighboring African nations that you have, and the issues such as whether it is refugee inflows or the fight against the rebel groups. We see that the protection of the national interest in the DRC also shape diplomatic relations and international engagements with a lot of other countries. Now this is where we should also understand the context and the significance that we have for India. Now there are certain contributions and there are certain interests that India has in this particular area. So India, for example, has been a very significant contributor to the UN peacekeeping missions, and including the ones in DRC also. We have seen that India's forces have been very important part of even the MONUSCO, and we see that they have played a very crucial role in making sure that we can engage in the efforts to protect the civilians and also support the disarmament of the combats that have happened in that area. And at the same time, we see that India's participation also demonstrates the commitment that India has to its global peace initiatives and the role and the responsibility that India has taken in the international affairs. Then at the same time, there are a lot of economic and resource interest also that we have in India. For example, we have seen that India has done mining investments. India has done mining investments in this particular area, and that's why we see that Indian companies have been investing in DRC's mining sector, particularly in the extraction of copper and cobalt, which are very critical for electronics and renewable energy in India as well. And India's investments are not only contributing to India's needs for strategic minerals, but also impact the economic development in DRC as well. And at the same time, we also see that India also has been in looking into and has been a very significant exporter of the pharmaceutical drugs to Africa, and this also includes Democratic Republic of Congo. So that's why we see that it has been very significant from the perspective of pharma exports as well. Pharma exports that we do to these countries. Indian medicines very often are more affordable than those coming from the Western countries, and that's why they play a very crucial role in improving the healthcare accessibility in this particular region. Then India has been playing an important role in humanitarian aid and developmental projects as well. India has engaged in various humanitarian aid and development projects across Africa, and that's why we see that through bilateral assistance in the partnership with international organizations, India has been supporting their health, their education, their capacity building initiatives, all these things in Africa and also in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And then that's why we see that it also reflects the kind of the philosophy of South-South cooperation that we also talk about. So that's why we see that there are important roles that India has been playing in this particular situation. So that's why what we have seen is that India has played important role in health, in education, in building the infrastructures. So India has played a very important role in these kind of situations, and also partnering with international organizations, we have tried to also help in capacity building initiatives in this particular areas. So capacity building. So in a manner, the philosophy of what we call as South-South cooperation. Where we talk about the global South and how India has been trying to become a big leader in the global South. We see that this also is where India has been playing a very important role. And then there are diplomatic engagements, that India's diplomatic engagements with African countries, including the Democratic Republic of Congo, has been trying to strengthen, and especially through the forums like India-Africa Forum Summit. So we see that these have been fora that has been used by India, and these engagements have been trying to boost the political, economic and the social ties that India has with Africa. So that's why we see that there are significant contributions that India has. So that's why, as a part of, let's say, India-Africa Forum Summit and other such initiatives, India has been trying to play a very important role in boosting the political, economic and the social ties that we have with our African partners. Then one important role that India also plays has been in IT and education, that India has been trying to strengthen the IT sector and also higher education. They have been trying to, India has been trying to offer better avenues for the engagement in these areas, and also the initiatives that we have in India with digital economy building and digital education and e-governance and capacity building in the IT sector. We see that there are all these efforts also that in one way or the other also helps in building India's soft power in these kind of areas. So that's why it does have, and in this context India also has a very important role to play. Now coming to some of the other articles that we have today. First is about panel recommends simultaneous polls. Now we know that a high level committee that was chaired by our former President Ramnath Kovind has now put forward a comprehensive proposal to overhaul the electoral process in India. And this is where we are talking about the advocacy for the simultaneous elections to the Lok Sabha and the state assemblies, all in just one phase, and may be followed by municipal and panchayat elections within the 100 days of the general elections. So this is basically what has been recommended by this particular report that has been published. So what we see is that in this context there are certain proposals. For example, the proposal that has been published as per this article, it exceeds almost 18,000 pages, and this was condensed into almost a 321 page document for public viewing, and it was submitted to our President Draupadi Murmu. And this initiative aims at synchronizing the electoral process, as we know, and that is where we see that there are a lot of recommendations that have been given in this report. So what this report says is that there are certain things that we can do in a manner that this can be done, or this entire cycle of elections can be run simultaneously, and that's why there are all these things that they have submitted, that probably we can do this from the 2029 general election cycle. Now what exactly it says is that it talks about an entire plan, that it can start with setting an appointment date through the presidential notification, and following that a first sitting of the Lok Sabha and general elections can happen. And then after that, this approach can also be designed to synchronize the electoral timelines across the nation, and then after that we can try to align the dates. And apart from that, what we can do is that what it recommends is that there are certain changes that can be done by amending certain aspects of the Indian Constitution, like Article 83 or Article 172. Where Article 83, which talks about the duration of the houses of the parliament, or Article 172, which also talks about the duration of the state legislatures. So all these can maybe also amended so that we can make way for simultaneous elections. Then it has also recommended modifications in Article 324A and Article 325, so that we can enable simultaneous elections in panchayats and municipalities as well. So there are all these recommendations that have been talked about, and then at the same time it talks about the logistical challenges and the constitutional challenges that can come in, and that's why it talks about it has suggested various provisions for ensuring that all these things can be taken care of. For example, it talks about that the newly elected Lok Sabha or the state assembly should serve only the remainder of the original term, ensuring that we can synchronize the election cycle coming from 2029. So that's why there are all these things that they have recommended, and that is where we see this coming from. So most important in this are Article 83 first, where it talks about the duration of the parliament and how the duration of parliament has to be, and when the elections will happen, and when the replacements of the present members will happen. So Article 83 and then Article 172 of the Indian Constitution. So these are the two articles that has been talked about in this particular scenario, that how we can amend the same so that we can make way for simultaneous elections in this particular context of this articles. Now coming to another article, and this is about wholesale food inflation sped up in February on onion and tomato. So now in this context, when we are looking at this, it says that it has eased marginally to 0.2% last month, even as 8 of the 10 primary food items recorded accelerations in the price gains, and manufactured products, fuel and power register on year deflation. So now what we basically are talking about is WPI, or wholesale price index. Wholesale price index, just understand this, wholesale price index is a measure of the average change in the prices which are paid by the wholesalers for goods on a bulk basis, and it focuses on the price of the goods before they reach the retail level. Now when it comes to wholesale price index, and there is also something which is CPI, or consumer price index, what we see is that they are two aspects which are always looked into when it comes to counting the inflation or counting of the prices which are being paid. So where in case of wholesale price index, we are talking about the prices which are being paid by the wholesalers for the goods on a bulk basis. When they buy something at a wholesale level, how exactly do they do that? What is the price that they are paying? Whereas in case of consumer price index, it is what people like me and you who are the end consumers, what are we paying? And not only for the goods, but also for goods and services, everything that you do. For example, what are you paying for healthcare? What are you paying even if you are going to watch a film? So all these things will be there as a part of consumer price index, and but when it comes to the wholesale price index, it only considers the wholesale price of the goods on a bulk basis which are being paid on an average. So that's why they focus on the price of goods before they reach the retail level, and as they reach the retail level, this is where you have the consumer price index. Now coming to the last article, and this last article is about why governments are seeing red on Rhodamine B in street food. Now what happened? What is the context of this article? What we have seen is that on 17th of February, Tamil Nadu banned the sale of cotton candy after discovering that there was Rhodamine B, which is a kind of an industrial dye, in the samples which they collected from Chennai. And following Tamil Nadu's action, Karnataka also banned the harmful colorants in cotton candy, and also interestingly in gobi Manchurian in Karnataka. And then we also see that Andhra Pradesh also has started testing the samples for all these harmful dyes. So what is this Rhodamine D? What is this Rhodamine D? So Rhodamine D, just know this, that it is a part of the rhodamine dye family, which is known for their fluorescent properties or the fluorescent colors that they have, and especially how they bring in bright pink or purple color characteristics to anything. Now they are a part of the rhodamine dye family, and they are known for the fluorescent properties, and this is a kind of xanthine dye. Alright, just remember these names from prelims perspective, that it's a kind of xanthine dye. Alright, it's a kind of xanthine dye, and this xanthine dye is, which basically means that it is a synthetic compound which is derived from the xanthine, and it is characterized by very bright pink and purple colors. Now when it comes to the use of these dyes, we see that predominantly they are used in the textile and also in the cosmetics, and textile, cosmetics, and also leather industry for dyeing purposes. So just know this, that they are used in textiles, they are used in textiles, they are also used in leather industries. Alright, they are used in textiles, they are used in leather industries, and they are also used in the cosmetics. They're also used in the cosmetics. So this is where we are using these, and this is where they are used for dyeing purposes due to the colors, the fluorescence that they give. Now what we see is that a lot of in scientific research etc. also they are actually used, and they can be used also to track water flow and also leaks that happen due to intense coloration and fluorescence. So that's why we see that they are actually used in a lot of cases. But the problem lies with the health impact that they have, that despite they have industrial and scientific use, Rhodamine B is not approved for consumption or in food products. Alright, it is something that is supposed to be toxic for humans and has been associated with various health issues. It has even been linked potentially to cancer. So long-term exposure or ingestion can also lead to very serious health implications, including damage to the liver, damage to the kidney, and all the many of the other organs, as well as they also increase the risk of certain kinds of cancers. So that's why because of all these health concerns that we have, we are not really making the use or allowing the use of Rhodamine B in food. So that's why it's very, very important, and especially when it comes to the food, they are also used to give very bright colors. For example, even they are mixed with chili powder many a times. They are mixed with chili powder also to give a bright red color to the chili powder. So that's why this is very dangerous in that sense, and that's why it needs to be tested for a lot of times. So when you look at what the permitted colors are, just in case you need to know about the permitted colors, so according to FSSAI, the permitted colors are only these: for red, for yellow, for blue, and for green. These are the chemicals that are allowed to be used, and that's why Rhodamine B is not allowed to be used. But unfortunately, we have seen the use of Rhodamine B in a lot of cases, and that's why when we talk about gobi Manchurian in case of Karnataka, we see that, I mean, if you are here, I mean, when you come to Bengaluru, you'll find that this has been one of the most popular food items here, and unfortunately rhodamine B is being used somewhere where it is very difficult also to find, and they give very bright red colors to these, and that's why the food items will look very good in their colors, unfortunately, and that's why this is something that has been banned, and it is something which is a welcome step from these states, whether Tamil Nadu or Karnataka or even in Andhra Pradesh. Now we see that the testings are happening. So that's why they can be there in these food items, they can be there in chili powder, etc. So that's why they need to be tested for. Now coming to the mains questions from today's articles, the first question: discuss the strategic significance of India-Bhutan relations in the context of regional security dynamics, particularly with reference to China's growing influence in South Asia. So we discussed about India-Bhutan relations, the history of it, and how we are cooperating on various different fronts, and the threat that this relation poses from China. So that's why we have to talk about all that in this reference. And the second question: examine the implications of the ongoing conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo for global peace and security, with its special emphasis on India's role in UN peacekeeping missions as well. So we discussed how India also plays a role in peacekeeping missions in Africa and in Congo also in that sense. So what India plays as a role and what this conflict means for global security. So these are the two aspects that you have to touch. So you should try and write these answers. Try to write these answers, and even if you want, you can even write the basic points about this answer in the comments also. And this is something that can also lead to your peer review of the answers by many of the other aspirants also who are watching these lectures. So that will help you also significantly. Just derive the information from all the discussions that we did and use that information in writing these answers. So this brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you very much for being here.